This is RTP. This is RTP180.
So 20 years ago, as I'm waiting for my screen to pop up, am I pressing the wrong button? Oh, there we go. Whoops. So 20 years ago, supposed to be happening while I was coming up. It's all right.
It's a great song, though. Love that song.
It's a really good song, yeah, and it plays into the rest of the piece. So, 20 years ago, my sister Lynn, my sister-in-law Allison, and I had 7 sons under the age of 5 who we brought to my mom's house one morning because my sister had the really cool idea to pull out the camcorder and interview each of them individually, Art Linkletter style. Now, I might be dating myself a little bit, so if you don't know who Art Linkletter was, he was the host of a show called Kids Say the Darndest Things, which they did and they do, and if you have children of your own, you know that's true. Well, my son, Matthew, was 3 years old at the time, and already he had this determination that he was never going to get the answer to a question wrong. And my sister knew this about him, of course, and so she needled him and asked him a bunch of zingers. But the question that she asked him that stuck with me that day and has stayed with me all this time was this one. She said, "What happens to music when you're done listening to it?" So Matthew got real serious, and he pondered this question for a long moment, and he said, very practically and reasonably, "Well, it goes back to the record store so that other people can listen to it." And I also realized that the fact that I have a son who is old enough to have once had the concept of a record store dates me a little bit too. But that's okay. But it's a really good question, isn't it? I mean, what does happen to music when we are done listening to it? I mean, music is something that we can understand and explain when we break it down into its components, right? Notes and rhythm, measures and time signatures, melody and harmony. I mean, these are things we can very easily explain through music and science, music theory, math. What's harder to explain is what music actually is. When all of those components come together, why is it that music moves us so? I mean, there's really nothing in a sequence of notes that would necessarily evoke an emotional response in any of us. I mean, researchers are doing some work and trying to figure this out, as researchers like to do here in RTP too, sure. They think there's some kind of connection between the cerebellum and the limbic system, but the fact is, just because they know how certain functions in the human body come together and work, that doesn't mean that they can explain why music has the capacity to move us. I mean, no more than any of that research can explain how it is that as human beings, just because they understand the functions of our body, how is it that we come to move each other? Because the funny thing is, science doesn't really know who we are either. They don't know where we come from, and they don't know where we go. What happens to that music when we're done listening to it? And I asked that question that way because at my last soundtrack, which is my company, we use the word soundtrack as a metaphor for life. We believe certainly that music can tell the story of any life, but we also believe that every life is infused with music, and that each life is actually a soundtrack of its own, a living, breathing soundtrack that has the capacity for us to move each other. I mean, what happens to that music when we're done listening to it? It makes me wonder, when I think about my own soundtrack, where will that soundtrack go when the world is done listening to my music? Well, the truth is, we don't know. We don't know what happens to the music when we're done with listening to it. We don't know what happens to us when we're done. But I believe that music and our lives, music and death are inextricably linked. In fact, I believe that wherever the music comes from is where we eventually go to. And I believe that the music there must be so beautiful and so profound, beyond anything that any mortal composer could come up with, that we actually have to listen to it with something other than our ears. It's a profound thing. and we don't understand how any of it works. Music and death, I think that there's something very important that connects the two of them. And I think that it makes a lot of sense, really, because, you know, for millennia, the human imagination has been captivated by the notion of choirs of angels, and that hasn't been for nothing. But of course, even though the music goes there, it stays right here too, doesn't it? I mean, thanks to angels like David Bowie, Leonard Cohen, and of course the biggest angel of all, Aretha Franklin. So the music is here, and the music is there, and we thank everybody who's ever been a part of our lives who has gone to that ineffable beyond. And they come to our memory when we think about music that we associate with them, and that music somehow connects us with them. I think we all have had that experience, right? Somehow, music and life, equally inexplicable, but forever connected. I mean, I think what happens to all of the music when we're done listening to it is it lives on. It's here and it's there. It's here and it's there. And our human brains will never be able to explain that. But someday, when we move beyond this mortal coil, our souls just might. Thank you.